Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
So welcome back to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today from Washington, D.C. at the Harrington Hotel, where in a little while Globetrotter Robert Hunter is going to be holding his Interfaith Clergy Leaders Conference to bring unity to the world, spirituality. And we're here, we have the pleasure to be with a very famous medical surgeon, Dr. James Yanney. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. And it was a pleasure to meet you last night and be able to see and listen to all you're doing, and the people really from around the world that are doing really good things, and we don't hear enough about it, I think, and to inspire people to make a difference.
Well, thank you very much, and you're very humble. Just to let you know, he's not only a medical surgeon, but he also has gone all across the world helping with many different and varied humanitarian activities. And so last night, he was brought in and as a speaker, keynote speaker, at the Caribbean African Faith-Based Leadership, and run by Dr. Agarom Dike. And, I heard you speak, and I said, this is the most mellow doctor I've ever met. I said, I've got to meet you. And here we are today. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your background.
I grew up actually in Sioux City, Iowa, and I spent a lot of time there and in Nebraska as well. Parents were, humble, focused people on the Lord, and we're really just very focused on integrity and on making a difference in their community. They were always looking on how they could uplift people. And so from an early age, I was taught to have a heart for the Lord and to serve. And as I mentioned earlier, I learned from my father early on about more about how God works and how we can make a covenant with the Lord, and everything we do, we have to make sure we stick to the covenant. But it's something that directs our heart to be good stewards for what we have, and how we can utilize what God has given us, our gifts, to really make a difference in people's lives. And they were very interested in children. I've been very interested in children because I think that's our future. And I've always believed that there's a genius in every child. There are tremendous gifts in every child.
Right.
And that's our responsibility as a community, in our state, in our nation, and around the world, to try to really maximize the human potential of a child. And when I was in college, I was part of the Nebraska Human Resources Research Foundation, which was really college students that were brought in by University, Dr. Galen Dodge and Dr. Clifton, who is well known for his speeches on positive thinking and making a difference to his lives. And we had worked with children from all walks of life during the week, and then we bring all those kids together from all levels, economically, backgrounds, minorities versus mainstream, and they would learn from each other. It was powerful to see these kids interact and learn from each other. And so early on in college, I learned, how can we maximize the potential of children? So I mentioned earlier, when I was 5 years old. We're Lebanese background. My great-grandparents came over from Lebanon. In the late 1800s, my great-grandfather built around 50 churches in 16 states in the Midwest. I'm not sure he did it. He died in 1918 helping flu victims. And my father then was on a national Lebanese church board. And so we got to know Danny Thomas. And so Danny called him in 1959 and said, I want to come meet with you, which he flew into Omaha, Nebraska. And as a 5-year-old child, I was privileged to sit on his lap right into our home. And I remember clearly Danny saying to my father, I made a covenant with God that if I became successful in the movie industry, that I would build a hospital for children. So that night at our home, they came up with the name St. Jude's Hospital. And the next morning, he had my sister and I and some neighbor children raise the first money for St. Jude's. The point of the story was, I kept thinking back as I get older, what was the key to their success in everything they did? Mm-hmm. And it really was the covenant. It was really getting your heart right and getting your whole focus on what am I doing every day. So as my dad said, he said, the definition of who we are is what we're thinking nobody's watching. So when I do my devotion in the morning, I would think, okay, I'd make a list of what I was going to do during the day, and I'd say, is it selfish or selfless? Selfish or selfless? And I'd try to really focus on being selfless in everything I was doing during the day as my goal. Yes. I wasn't always able to do that. And then I learned about forgiveness. None of us are perfect. We're all drawn to sin. So I thought, well, I'm going to do my best every day to cleanse my soul and really focus on what I can do for God's kingdom. Eventually, I got to the point, because there was a time in my life as I became more successful that I was drawn by the world and kind of went away from God for a while. And I told my wife one day, I said, I don't feel good about this. I said, if we believe in God, then we need to be with Him 24/7. So I made a commitment to read the Bible through every year the rest of my life, which I've done now for 35 years. And every year God takes me deeper in His wisdom and how to apply it. And so, today that's my focus is, as I told my son who's an attorney, I said, when I became enslaved to Christ, I actually had total freedom. And he goes, how do you become free when you become enslaved? I said, and that's why I just feel totally at peace, because I realized every day when I wake up, either I'm training to go to heaven or hell, take your pick, And so I thought, because all God's doing as we're passing through this lifetime, which is very short compared to eternity, is what are we doing each day and how are we handling the challenges? As my dad said, you're going to have challenges and you're going to have deep valleys. He said, Satan wants you to look down. God wants you to look up, thanking for the challenges, to become stronger, not weaker, to learn from them. And so every time I've been down deep in a valley, I just look at the Lord and thank Him for the challenges and try to learn from it and try to get stronger. And so it's a fun process. I'm almost 68 years old, and I keep learning. I feel like the more I know, the more I don't know. I had a patient a couple of years ago say, well, you must be really smart. You have a couple of doctorate degrees. And I said, I'm pretty stupid. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you stay humble, what you realize is the more you know, the more you don't know. I said, every level that I grew in my education, I realized the horizons were even bigger, that I even had more questions and realized how big God was and how small I really was. And so when I was chairman in Oregon Health Science University in surgery, I had all these department people that were there, and I said to them, I said, there's no power in ego and status. There's really no power in being humble and vulnerable to the truth before the Lord. So we try to apply those principles, and we've been fortunate to be put in the presence of many really good leaders and the projects we're doing locally and across the United States and also in other countries. So.
Makes total sense, and I actually ascribe to the same philosophy of realizing how much I don't know. Yeah. Most people think that wow, you must know so much, and I'll tell you something that to the viewers I'll actually admit is that I feel the more I go on, I have no idea why I'm in such a good position, because I don't even consider myself that smart a guy.
I feel the same. Well, the other thing that's really interesting is that everybody keeps saying how great the work we're doing. I said, you don't understand. I said, I learn more from the children we work from then they learn from us. I said, I'm inspired by children. I'm just always pleasantly surprised at how much children know and how much they really want to learn and be protected. One of the programs we're doing in Charleston, we actually did a survey among several hundred children from poverty, and we asked them, what do you want to do when you grow up? 80% of them said, we want to own our own business. And so we now have 1,000 teachers teaching 21,000 children across the state on entrepreneurship and how to build their own business plan. These are pretty young kids. And again, it's been inspiring. The reason that that's been important was because when we asked them why why people were shooting each other, why children were shooting each other, where was this violence coming from? And they said, well, we really don't want to be involved in that. We really don't want to be in gangs. We really don't want to be shooting other kids. Said, but that's just part of the culture if we want to be there and make enough money to support our family and selling drugs. And
Amazing.
But they said all it would take to get us out of that would be somebody who cared, who could be our mentor. So we have huge mentorship programs, and these kids said, because we know that even though we can make money right away selling drugs, we know that our life is going to end pretty quickly. So why do we want to stay on that? And these kids are pretty sharp. They go like, so we really, our goal would be if we could be with somebody who could mentor us and care about us, we would run from all this life. We would want to be involved with people who could teach us good principles and give us a chance to have a good, honest life and not be involved in drugs.
Well, it's amazing because as we converse more and more, first when you mentioned Danny Thomas, because I trained at the Memphis Veterans Administration Hospital, and I was there and would go there periodically.
Small world.
Yeah, so that was a small world. And then I heard you speak yesterday, and now we're speaking today, and I see your philosophy, which for me is a very normal, exactly the way I operate. And then now you've gone into the fourth thing, and I have this with a friend of mine. His name is Rafael. He's a TV announcer and TV host. And he and I do a program in Spanish because I was born in Cuba. And the program is always something about life and some way of approaching it so that you can have a better life and more accord, more agreement, and that there's always going to be downs and fights and conflicts. That's life, part of life. And so each week that goes by, and this happens more and more, I come with what I have set up. I don't really tell him because I tell Jorge, who's the producer. And when before we start, he's looking at it, and he starts laughing, and he goes, Jorge, he said, and he calls him Bomba. He said, es Bomba. He goes, el doctor escogió el mismo tema. He goes, the doctor has chosen the same theme as me again. So today, the reason I say this is we're with each other.
Right.
You're talking about kids, and I wanted to let you know something, and then I'm going to ask you a question, is I'm actually president of a nonprofit drug education group. It's called Foundation for Drug-Free World. The Americas chapter, I named it, because the Americas, I feel, is freedom. Yeah. And including all the Americas, North, South, Central, and this hemisphere, which was for freedom. And so drugs enslave you, and so I wanted to keep freedom. That's why I gave the name. And so then, here you're talking, and last year we had on the unfortunate circumstance of 107,000 Americans dying from drug doses, overdoses, and deaths, and addiction. Yeah. And so most of those really are younger people, unfortunately, because of the culture they grew up in. So I was going to ask you and you just started to get into it a little bit, what's your feeling about a program like that, or drug education society, and what's going on in our country right now?
I think it's absolutely critical because most information that's out there is not getting to the children for some reason, and what you're doing is incredibly good and is so needed across our country and throughout the Americas. Oftentimes I see children are influenced by their peers, and especially by social media, and they're given a lot of information that may be not true. They feel a lot of pressure. Suicide rate in this country amongst children has gone up dramatically, and I think a big reason for that is that, again, they grow up in an environment where they don't feel support and love, and they don't have mentors, to kind of fulfill the roles. Now, my personal belief is I think the way our system is set up for welfare, for example. I've been an advocate to change welfare for a long time, and that is there are people in need that are going to need help, but there are people that can work that we can uplift, and I don't believe a system should be there to incentivize the father, for example, not to be in the home. I think a lot of these young boys that we have seen that have gotten into trouble don't have a great father role model.
Right.
And so those are the kind of things that we can do systemically in this country to make a big difference, I think, right away. And a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but the nice thing about the alliance that we developed in Charleston, South Carolina, it's called the Alliance for Community Collaboration. We literally went to people that you would think we probably disagree on a lot of things and maybe vehemently disagree, and we said, let's go meet with them. And so we sat down with the people that you might think would be the enemy of our belief system, but they're not.
Right.
And once we met with them, we realized we had most everything in common, and so now we have this alliance of people from all walks of life. We meet every other week, and we have identified core issues, and we're now developing huge mentorship programs, and we're sending large numbers of kids to camps in the summer. I've been working in inner city youth ministry for about 28 years with Reverend Jimmy Gallant in Charleston, and I remember when we first got started, he said, Doc, he said, I've buried so many children. He was the police chaplain as well as running a church. He said, these kids need to see more than the dark environment they're in. And so we started doing field trips. And I didn't know how powerful it would be. And all these kids that we would take on field trips and send to camp, 28 years later, one young girl is now the head engineer at SPAWAR, Space and Naval Warfare. And I asked her, I said, so Letitia, what made the difference? She said, you cared, you got us out of that environment so we could see that there was something else in the world besides darkness, drugs. And we said, we're not going back. And we're so inspired that, as a matter of fact, this one little boy from Harlem I sponsored to a camp that year in the Midwest, after the first day, he sent a little note to me and said, Dear Dr. Yanney, my name is Emmanuel. Thank you for sending me to camp. It's the first day of my life I haven't heard gunshots. It's the first time in my life I could look at trees and hear birds sing. Now I know God exists. And now that child became an adult. Now he runs programs in Harlem helping these children the same thing. And so that camp has grown tremendously. And so there are solutions. So we started looking at the environment that children were growing in and living in, and realized about 11 years ago that the environment was dark, and there's about 5 university studies that show that children in dark, non-loving environments have about 1 trillion synapses die in their brains every day. Now, I thought that number was crazy.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, so here I'm in Omaha, Nebraska with Susie Buffett at the Sherwood Foundation. We're having a meeting one day, and I said, children in a dark environment, they lose a large number of synapses every day in their brain. And she looked at me and goes, 1 trillion. I said, I know. I just was afraid to say that number because it's so huge. I said, no, it's 1 trillion synapses a day. They've proven it in many studies. And so these children, by the time they're 3 years old during brain development, are already set way behind the 8 ball. And guess what? Those synapses never come back. So we started an early child development program, and then leads into 3 years old. They started a school called the Meade Street Academy, which is started by Ben and Kelly Navarro, incredible people, and they have great vision. And Ben actually gave a TED Talk, and he said, we realized is that these 3-year-old children had 1/5 the vocabulary of an average American student. So when they would go to school, they would fail, and their self-esteem would be crushed, and they would drop out and get into drugs and violence. So he said we developed the school to address that, but we knew we had to change the environment at home. So we literally went into all the homes of these children, and with the parents, maybe one parent at home, one in prison, one on drugs, whatever, and we would say, okay, do you love your children? Yes. Do you not want them on drugs? Yes. And so we said, we built the school, and we want you to be committed in writing. You're going to come to school with them every day if you're not working. You're going to learn with them. We're going to make you teachers' aides so that you'll protect your self-esteem. But you're going to learn with them since you dropped out of school and you didn't learn. So because when they go home, we want the lights to be on. We want you to learn together and be positive. And so what we saw happen was that these children, 2 years ago, was our the first fifth grade class, and every single fifth grader scored in the top 99% of the country. They outscored all the schools in Charles. Got $2 million in scholarships. These kids, I brought in educators from 30 states, and mostly were African American educators, very bright men and women, and they were blown away. They said, these are like advanced high school students. These are fifth graders. Incredible vocabulary. So the philosophy was to teach up, not teach down, to expect a lot because these children have a lot. And so by setting the goals high for these children and loving them and feeding them 2 organic meals a day and making, because they have to be nourished, because that's another issue, and then having the parents involved, we'd go to their homes, and now the parents are dressed up, they have jobs, they're excited, and so seeing that transformation, we know that's what it takes to get this massive shift.
It solves the whole country dilemma.
It does?
Very interesting.
Oh.
Sitting with you here, I'm going to say something maybe a little bold, but I've always wanted, and you've actually given me an answer, and I'd like to know more, is, and unfortunately we run out of time on the show, but I want to end on this, is I've always wanted to do a study, a scientific and medical study, showing that affinity or care or love are directly related to health, without a doubt, mental status or whatever, you're just giving it to me. And now you've actually explained something from a spiritual level of why the drugs in our youth, and marijuana specifically, is causing brain deficiency as they don't develop properly. But it makes total sense because you're saying there's no love and care. And what is a drug but an extension, almost of murdering yourself because of the lack of love. So obviously less synapses even more than the lack of love. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, how would you like, I would love to do a study with you together that we work on this.
Sure. I would love to do it. There are a lot of things we could expand on. I know that, again, several university studies show that children, for example, who are not exposed to positive music and art at a young age, looking at brain development, they have real-time MRIs looking at brain development and their exposure to music and art, they had 1/5 the chance of becoming successful in science and math, because the brain development was underdeveloped because they didn't have music and art in their life. So what's the first thing that schools cut in their budget is music and art.
Well, I tell you what, we'll have to continue the conversation.
Okay, very good.
I can tell you and I could speak for quite a while, but for those of you watching, if you needed anything more than just the common sense, the spiritual feeling of being connected to God, and I'm sure Dr. Yanney would agree with me, in spite of your religion, whether you were Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, whatever, being connected with God, and now we have even more reason now. Let's work together. Let's use what Dr. Yanney has said, and let's start solving not only the drug crisis, but the warfare and the conflict amongst mankind. And let's, for the first time, go forward and really create a happy planet. I'm so happy to have had you today. Thank you so much, Dr. Yanney.
Appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet